So first of all, why the heck are we having a lecture on generosity and greed in Tolkien? Because it's important. So first of all, why is greed and generosity? Why are we talking about that? Because greed has a very prominent place in Christian tradition, right? It has been calculated that greed has, the money has been mentioned more in New Testament than sex. So that's like shows how important this topic is. The Apostle Paul tells Timothy that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Jesus famously says that it is harder for a rich man to enter in the kingdom of heaven than a camel go through the eye of a needle. So pretty heavy statements that have been picked up by the church fathers. And you see the early Christian writers talk a lot about greed. The medievals, they were really talking about greed in the in Dante and Inferno, which some of you just read. There's a special circle in hell assigned to those who are greedy and avaricious. But greed has fallen on hard times, and generosity as well. Right now, it is kind of a neglected virtue and vice. I work on virtue ethics, and there's been one publication on generosity in the last 50 years. And greed is doing a little better because it's a vice. Vices are always more interesting to write about, but not that much. So it's just not very prominent in the contemporary academic life, and to boot, the contemporary culture has this ambivalent feelings about greed, right? Because, Gordon Gekko tells us that greed is good. Greed is, we kind of understand that greed serves as this really powerful engine of economic growth. All kind of growth can happen because of greed, right? So we're starting to feel like, well, maybe we should re-examine, like, how bad is greed really? So that's why we're talking about this. But why is it that we're using Tolkien to talk about greed and generosity? Well, first of all, Tolkien, this is kind of one of the more important reasons for why we're talking about this in Tolkien, is that Tolkien is really deeply steeped in the tradition that gave us the conceptual tools, a lot of the conceptual tools for understanding both virtues and vices. Tolkien is deeply Catholic, not just Catholic, he is a Thomist. And Thomas Aquinas is the one that kind of takes up the tradition that has been developed by the Desert Fathers, by disparate strands of Christian theology, and kind of unifies it, gives it the shape that it has now. The 7 deadly sins kind of we get the number 7 settled with Aquinas. We get the pride as the mother of all vices settled with Aquinas, and he's the one also that has like the best articulation of the virtues accounts that we have to date. And Tolkien is really kind of has all of that in his bones. So all of that good theology and thinking shows up without much effort in his writing. And before we go on, I want to say that Aquinas writes this book on evil. So this is where most of my stuff comes from here. And Rebecca Conondike DeYoung wrote this. If this is too much for you, this is a distillation of everything that's written in this big book, and it's written in a very kind of accessible, good, easy to understand way. So I highly recommend this book if you're interested at all in like learning about other vices in the 7 deadly sins tradition. Okay, So this is the first reason for why we're using Tolkien. Second reason, he really created this rich, consistent world that's populated by like really real feeling, like the characters, they're just really real and kind of meaty, right? That might be the best word to describe them, but you can just see them, you can feel them, you can relate to them. And whenever you study virtues and vices, you look for those kind of worlds. You look for examples that can really show you, demonstrate these concepts well. And there's a ton of it in Tolkien. And last but not least, I just really love Tolkien. So anytime I get to talk about him, I welcome that. So this is how we're going to talk about this stuff today. This is the order of the procession. First, we're going to talk about the role of avarice in Tolkien's world. And you might think, why am I just switching from greed to avarice? Never fear, I'm going to explain that. But throughout the lecture, I'm going to use the word avarice to refer to greed. We're going to talk about kind of profile. We're going to create the vice profile. What exactly avarice is, what does it look like, what does it do? And at the end, lest you be discouraged, we're going to propose kind of point a direction in which we might want to go if we are to kind of look for a cure for avarice. Okay, so this is the big three parts of the lecture. The I. Because I can, to get you guys' attention. No, this is now we're transitioning to the lecture itself. So, what is the role of avarice in Tolkien's world? So people have argued, and there are good reasons to think that greed is the central or just most serious and dominant sin in Tolkien's world. And there are good reasons for this. If you look at each of Tolkien's sagas, each of this like big standalone kind of pieces of writing, each of them turns or like starts or at the heart of it a person's or a nation's inordinate desire to possess something. So if you go with the creation myth, it's this beautiful Tolkien's version of Genesis. It's gorgeous, and it's short, so you should read it. At the heart of that story is the kind of the Satan's version, the Melkor. He's the first kind of angel type character. He desires, he really desires, he's greedy for the imperishable fire, which is kind of the animating force of the world, the cosmos. And his inordinate desire for that imperishable flame kind of kickstarts this whole disaster, well, depending on how you look at it. But it starts the whole kind of ball going. Then we move on to Silmarillion. And at the heart of the Silmarillion, Silmarillion is kind of the story of the fall of the Elvish race. By the way, have anybody warned you that this is going to be like a nerdy lecture? So there's going to be a lot of this kind of nerdy stuff. So just, you weren't. Anyway, so the creator of, this is Fëanor. He is one of the highest, the most noble elves. And he creates these three jewels, Silmarils. And they're like nothing else that ever has been created in the world. And then disaster strikes, and the only way to kind of save the world from unraveling is to take these jewels and break them apart and use them to kind of heal the world. And when the gods and all the elves come to Fëanor asking for these jewels, he refuses to give them up. because his heart is so attached to them. He defies the gods. He leads the rebellion of the elves because he wants to hold on to this thing that is so precious to him that he wants to possess. Then we're moving up to the Lord of the Rings, right? We have this kind of the most powerful character in the story, Sauron. What does he want to possess? The ring, right? Guess who else wants to really possess the ring? Gollum, and arguably he's like the lowest of the creatures, right? So you have this highest, most powerful creature and the most lowest, like at the bottom ladder creature, and they united in their desire to possess this object that is precious to them. Now we're moving on to Hobbit. We have, again, the most powerful being in this story is Smaug. And I'm not going to say Smaug, just because I'm Russian and I can do this. This is my payback for mispronouncing all the Dostoevsky's names. Anyway, so Smaug, the most powerful being, and Thorin, so kind of those two key characters of the story, they both united in their desire to possess this hoard, this treasure, right, that's accumulated by the king under the mountain. Okay, so far we're making pretty good case, right, that greed is kind of the central theme, the central sin of Tolkien's universe. But here's the thing. Possessiveness in Tolkien is not identical with avarice. And in this, Tolkien really follows the lead of Thomas Aquinas, who draws a distinction between, so Aquinas kind of unites and puts together the disparate voices in the Christian tradition up to this point, where some were saying, yes, it's the same thing, then others were like separating it. And Aquinas gives definitive answer up to that point. And drawing a distinction between the general sin of possessiveness and the specific sin of avarice. So avarice becomes kind of a species of this genre of the genera, which is possessiveness. So from now on, when I say greed, I will mean like this big kind of desire, inordinate desire for any good, okay? And when I will say avarice, I will mean specific desire for, we'll talk about that in a second. But this general sin, general inordinate desire for any good, there are many ways in which a desire can go wrong, right? We can get too attached to the things that we have. That's the case of Fëanor, for example, right? We can want more than what is appropriate for us. So it is appropriate to have like X number of, well, actually that was the sin of Melkor. Iluvatar gave him, Iluvatar is the creator of the world, gave him the flame imperishable that was appropriate to him, but Melkor desired more. And that's where the desire went wrong. We can desire that which ought not to be desired. Just stuff that should not be possessed, etc. You can imagine other scenarios, I'm sure. So avarice, remember, is a specific desire, and it's a desire for money. It's an inordinate desire for money or for things that money can buy. And this is kind of its key thing. It's not just like, well, I desire nice clothes. Money can buy nice clothes, therefore I'm avaricious. No, it's when you desire things that you can buy with money for their for the monetary value that's embedded in that, right? It's the difference between like a collector of wines, that collects wines for the sake of like the wine itself, drinking the wine, and the collector of wines that makes a collection as an investment. And it's a thing, apparently. And note that, of course, this desire can go on in many different ways as well. And I'll let you, your imagination fill in the blank. Okay. So this is where the distinction shows up, in Tolkien particularly. Because you're thinking, well, aren't you just being picky? But no, I don't. This is a quote from Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf explains what exactly was wrong with Moria, what happened, why Moria was destroyed. He talks about, he switches to this monetary language. So usually when the works of dwarves or elves are described, Gandalf and other people talk about the beauty of the objects that are created, or like how good these things were, and how like intricate, delicate these things were. This is one of the few places where Gandalf explicitly talks about, no, like this is not just a beautiful or useful metal, it was expensive thing, and it cost a lot of money, right? And this is what the foundation of the fortune of the people. And this is why they were so greedy for them, for this thing. Also, here's an example. When, I almost said Andy Serkis, when Smeagol, when Smeagol first looks at the ring, he sees it as the shiny gold thing. And at that point, he is avaricious. He wants the thing that the other person wants because it looks valuable, right? It's like it's gold and nice to have. But of course, his desire for the One Ring grows and evolves way beyond avarice. Whatever first motive he had, like the golem at the end of the story, is not does not see the ring in terms of its monetary worth, right? Because no amount of gold you can offer, like no amount of mithril you can offer Gollum at that point, that would make him part with this ring. So here you see this distinction, right? That shows up. All right. Why does it matter? Why do we need to care about this? Well, first of all, it helps us make sense of certain experiences. Like an experience of Bilbo in The Hobbit. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you have the quote here. Basically, when Bilbo takes the Arkenstone, and when he's about to hand it over to the Elven King and to Bard, he experiences this tug at his senses. He gives it away, not without a shudder, not without a glance of longing. So does it mean that Bilbo is greedy? Well, no, it doesn't, because it has already been established before that, no, this is like his share of the treasure. He doesn't really, like, he's willingly disposes with his share of the treasure. He gives them money. What tugs at him, at his heartstrings, is the object itself. It's its beauty. It's value, not in terms of like how much it's worth, but how the thing is, right? So just making this distinction between avarice and just general possessiveness, or greed, helps us explain this phenomena. And of course, when we have the right diagnosis of the disease, that helps us figure out the cure better. So that's why we're making this distinction. Wake up. We're moving on to the next section. So what is avarice? What are its characteristics? Like I already said, avarice is concerned with the monetary value of things. And this is where this is kind of where it gets its pernicious character. This is what's wrong with avarice, that it reduces everything to the dollar amount. Okay, it sees people, and not as people. It sees them as like potential money makers, or like what can, you know, those pictures of where you have the dollar sign instead of your face, right? It sees trees and, I don't know, sky and earth, air, you name it. It sees Silmarillion and the Arkenstone in terms of like how much is it worth. Avarice's contrary vice is prodigality. It's the spendthrifting, right? The prodigal son. First, he gets greedy for the stuff. Then he gets it, and he spends it on worthless things, right? He spends it all. And in that character, we see that it is possible to have, this is one of the very few vices where you can have both the vice and the opposite vice at the same time. Because if you're cowardly, right? Well, the opposite of, like, the vice kind of contrary to cowardice is rashness. You just don't care about any danger. You rush in without thinking. It's not possible to be both cowardly and rash at the same time. I can't think of another example right now, but maybe you can. But it is possible to be both avaricious and prodigal at the same time. In fact, typically those two vices work together and they create this vicious circle. Vicious, huh? Actually, literally vicious. And you see this demonstrated in Dante's Inferno. You have this shades that hurl the stones at one another, right? So howling on one side, howling on the other, popping their chests to roll enormous weights. They slammed those stones together front to front, and straight off, each side turned about and yelled, "Why do you fritter? Why the fist so tight?" So in the dismal circle, they went round on either hand to the point opposite, bellowing out their poetry of shame. On the one side, you have the avaricious. Why do you fritter? Why do you waste? On the other side, you have the prodigal, the profligate. Why are you holding on so tightly to your stuff? And in the same circle of hell, they're constantly going around and round together, clashing each other. And if you think about your own experience, this will ring true, right? You hold on to your money because you imagine that you can spend it on all the nice things that you want, right? That you really don't need. Or you end up going like on the spend, like, you know, I really need another drink at Starbucks. Or et cetera, right? Like you spend your money on all these things. And then suddenly you start counting them. Well, you know, I don't really need to give this charity because other people will give whatever, right? But you do that because you spend your money somewhere else on things that like don't really matter. So avarice also opposes two virtues, not just one, but two virtues. And this is also very important to notice about avarice. It opposes generosity and justice. And it's kind of clear how avarice opposes generosity, right? Like you think, okay, the generous person is the one that gives freely. avaricious person is the one that holds tightly, so I can see how that works. But what does justice have to do anything with avarice? Well, justice is a virtue that is concerned with giving others what is their due. And when avarice is opposed to justice, it takes and keeps money and things despite existing obligations to others. As such, it creates these daughter vices: treachery, perjury, fraud, all the things that are wrong with our financial sector, right? There's a great movie about this, Wall Street, where the motto of the main character is greed is good, right? But lest you think, oh, it's all these financial guys. I'm not like that at all. By the way, I don't think that Wall Street is inherently vicious. If you want to be to go into financial sector and be the agent of good, go for it. More power to you. This is just a caricature of the Wall Street that I'm giving you, because there are much subtler ways in which avarice makes us neglect or forego our obligations to others. It really provides this rationalization for why we shouldn't do what we know is the right thing to do. I am a pastor's wife. Once a year, every pastor has to suffer through this duty of preaching on giving, right? And everybody knows that it's coming, and everybody kind of okay, here we go again. But they do this because parishioners don't give, right? We don't tithe, and generally, tithing is a very neglected practice. And we all know that we should tithe, right? You ask your average Christian who knows the 10 Commandments, whatever, they're like, oh yes, I need to tithe. But we don't. Because it's really hard to part with money. And when you don't want to part with money, you start rationalizing. You start telling yourself stories. You start saying, well, do they really need it? Look at this. They're not even spending it in the right way. They built this giant building. I don't want to be part of that. Or I'd rather give my money directly to charity, which, by the way, we don't, right? Or you being approached by somebody saying, hey, here's this really awesome, worthy cause, and you're really kind of struck by how awesome the cause is, and you overcome by compunction. You say, you know what, I don't have money with me right now, but you know what, I'm going to go home, and I'm going to get online, and I'm going to totally donate to this cause. And what happens between you meeting this person, making a promise that I will do this, and getting home and actually getting online? Chances are your resolve kind of magically disappeared. Even though you promised to this person, you promised to yourself that you will do it, you forgo your obligation that you created because you start thinking of all these other ways that the money can be spent on. Okay. So we rationalize because, not just because we're avaricious, but one of the ways we rationalize is because we're avaricious. And this is where avarice can create a particularly nasty, but subtle, but very pervasive daughter vice. And that is insensitivity to the claims of mercy. We become blind to the people's need. We talk ourselves out of the pity that we feel because we want to hold on to this thing that we got. And this is where I will call on my, hold on, don't read it yet. In Tolkien, this very concept, how avarice both goes against justice and against mercy, is brilliantly shown in the dialogue between Thorin, Oakenshield, and Bard, the Dragon Slayer, at the gate of the Durin's Gate. Durin? No, Durin is in Lord of the Rings. Erebor, thank you. Blanked out. I'm going to set this out because this is important. If you don't know Tolkien at all, you got to know the context. Thorin just reclaimed this vast hoard of treasure, more than like enough than just unimaginable wealth. Okay, he reclaimed it because the dragon that was sleeping on that treasure flew out of the dwelling where the treasure was, flew down to the town that is on the lake and destroyed the lake because the dragon realized that the lake town people were helping the dwarves. Right, so the dragon kind of retaliates against the dwarves by going and destroying the lake town. Bard, a person who has this amazing arrow, manages to kill the dragon. But in this battle, the town is destroyed, people are displaced, it's winter, they don't have any food or clothes, really, they just escape with their lives. Fortunately, the elvish host shows up. They provide immediate help, but there's not enough resources, right? So Bard, with the king of the elves, comes to Thorin, asking Thorin to honor the agreement that Thorin made with the townspeople, that once Thorin reclaims this vast hoard of treasure, he's going to share with the people. So Bard says, hey, congratulations, you survived. Now, would be a really good time to honor the agreement that we made, because we really, really, really need this. And I could have shown you a clip from the Hobbit movie, but the movie is really bad. Yes, it is. So I could not bring myself to do that. So I am instead going to put this big quote on the screen, and I have 3 people who I've asked to read, and they will read us this quote.
In this debate, they have no voice.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So yes, here you have it, kind of in this one interaction. Really the effects of avarice, right? The people are in need. They ought to be pitied. The cause is just. And yet Thorin comes up with excuses that kind of, if you listen to them, start to sound reasonable, right? Enough to make himself believe that he is rightly refusing to give out what he has promised, and enough to kind of lead the rest of the dwarves along with him. So, Bilbo, however, is contrasted with Thorin throughout the whole Hobbit's tale. Bilbo serves as an example of generosity. And what the claim of the mercy, the need for mercy, is obvious to him, and he's also obviously sees the justice of Bard's words. So to an eye that is kind of unobstructed with avarice, the stuff is there to see, and it is avarice that blinds Thorin to both claims of mercy and to justice. Okay, and now we're moving to generosity, because the word has been introduced, right? So if you say, okay, woe is me, I thought that I did not have greed, and now I'm starting to realize, no, maybe there is some stuff in me after all. What are we to do? How are we to cure ourselves from this grip of avarice on our hearts? And this is the part that I'm still puzzling about. But my work and thesis is that we are to develop in ourselves sensitivities that are at the center of generosity. Because, because you'll see why. And here it is important to notice that it is not the same as lack of possessiveness. So you cannot cure yourself of avarice by saying, well, you know what? I'm just going to not care about anything. I'm going to give away everything and just, be free of any possessions. Because the most, the person that is the least possessive in all of the Tolkien's lore is Tom Bombadil, right? He has zero attachments to any earthly good. And yet, it is hard to think of him as a generous person. It is Bilbo who again and again and again is called generous and magnificent by people who are wise. Tom Bombadil, with the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, discovers this hoard of treasure, right, in the mounds when he saves them from Barrow-wights. And he lets them take the swords and like provisions from the treasure, and he scatters the rest on the grass for the birds and animals to pick about. Not because he's like, that is not an act of generosity. You don't look at this and say, wow, that is generous. You just think like, wow, he really does not care about this stuff, right? Like it's like, I have pebbles. I'm gonna scatter pebbles. That's what they are to them. He does show them hospitality, so he is hospitable, and there is some connection between hospitality and generosity that we will talk about in a second. But he is not generous. Bilbo is generous, and Bilbo knows the value of stuff. Yet he is free from an inordinate attachment to it. Again, this is, in Lord of the Rings, it's in the same context. They're talking about mithril. They're in the mines of Moria, and Gandalf says, Bilbo had a coat of mithril once, and I never told him, but it probably cost more than like all the Shire together. I wonder whatever happened to it. It's probably in some museum collecting dust. And Frodo realizes that, oh my goodness, I am wearing the coat of mithril that's worth more than all the Shire put together. And Bilbo gave it to me. So the quote is, Frodo said nothing, but he put his hand under his tunic and touched the rings of his mail shirt. He felt staggered to think that he had been walking about with the price of the Shire under his jacket. Had Bilbo known? He felt no doubt that Bilbo knew quite well. It was indeed a kingly gift. So because Bilbo realizes the value of the gift, it is an act of generosity for him to give the gift. It is a kingly gift, right? Were Bilbo not, like if Bilbo would not be aware of how expensive and how priceless this thing is, if this was kind of like Tom Bombadil just throwing out things, that wouldn't count as generosity. Okay. But how, like, so we say, okay, we're not going to aim for, like, lack of any possessions. We're not going to, like, go for non-possessiveness altogether. We're going to go for, like, the right amount of possessiveness, right? I'm going to value things in the right way, just have enough stuff. It's not possible, really, to establish an Aristotelian mean when it comes to generosity. Because if you guys read your Aristotle and remember him, right, you would probably tell me that the virtue is when you don't go too much, don't go too low, kind of go in the middle. That's the Aristotelian mean. But you can't do that with generosity. Because first of all, like how would you even go about doing this? But it's even more important is that both Aristotle and Aquinas agree that when we talk about things that we actually need, we're not talking about just absolute necessity. We're not talking about like, well, you know, you need like bread, water, some clothes, not to embarrass others that are around you. They both say that the kind of things that people need are things that are important for a flourishing human life. Okay. But that means not just survival, that means flourishing, right? That means feasting as much as fasting. That means beautiful things. That means leisure, where you can appreciate beautiful things and create beautiful things. It means on and on and on and on, right? So we're not talking about like just scrap your life to bare minimal and like just be that. No, the call of generosity is to live a flourishing human life and yet somehow realize what that life is so you don't go beyond the bounds of what is good for you to possess. It is telling that the race that kind of marked by its generosity is hobbits. They described as this generous people. They're the ones that, like, again and again and again presented as ones that value food and cheer and so on above hoarded gold. Okay. When you think of hobbits, you don't think like, oh, ascetics living in the desert of bread and water, right? You think like well-tilled fields, you know, kind of portly people and stout lasses and ale and pipe tobacco. They have this like full flourishing life, and somehow that enables them to, because they're rooted in the value of those things, they somehow are able to not be tight-fisted about things that really are not necessary for that life. If you look at the way Bilbo refuses several times attempts of people in the Hobbit to kind of give him gold, Bard says, no, you should have more. And Bilbo says, no, what am I going to do with it? I don't really need it. How am I going to get it home? When they get back to the Shire, almost back to the Shire, and they like dig up the treasure that that they have discovered in the troll cave. So Gandalf and Bilbo are there digging up this treasure, and Gandalf's like, well, are you gonna have some? And Bilbo's like, no, not really. Like, what am I gonna do with it? I don't need it. It's like, you take it and you like put it to good use. So that's the rationale again and again. Look, I know what I value, right? I know what's good human life looks like, or hobbit life. And I know that this monetary excess will somehow lead me away from that good life. So, what do we aim at? Well, a big thing is to trust God's provision. This is, I mean, we don't live in the world of Hobbit land, where somehow we're like magically protected. Well, not magically. They were protected by the labor of other people. But like the borders of our land are secure. We have somehow a stable population that we don't have to worry about like growth of babies that like people without work. There are no refugees coming from the wars, and now somehow we need to deal with them. But we live in the world where we are feeling insecure, right? Like we know that stuff happens, contingencies and disasters, etc. And that's where like kind of the foothold that avarice can get in our heart is to say, oh, you need to like create for yourself a little cushion, right? What if bad stuff happens? What if you need to go at 2 in the morning and get 2 shots of like espresso, whatever? I'm trying to think of really little stuff. But then we know there's big stuff that happens as well, right? So very easy to kind of rationalize our tight-fistedness by saying, well, you know, I need to really take care of myself, because who will? So really at the bottom of avarice very often is this distrust in God's provision. Somehow we do not think that God is capable of taking care of us. So we need to take care of ourselves, right? So a path out of avarice is to lean into the trust of God's provision. This is a very Aristotelian advice. How do you become virtuous? You do what virtuous people do, right? You practice giving. The more you do it, the easier it ought to become. And you say no to that voice in your head that says, oh, hold on to this thing. And you practice hospitality. So this is where there is an interesting type between hospitality and generosity that we'll take another lecture to explore. But people who are kind of described as generous also are hospitable people. Think of Bilbo. How many dwarves show up on his step? 12, right? No, 13, right. 13 dwarves, that's right, because he needs to be the lucky 14th number. 13 dwarves show up on his step and like kind of like, feed us. Okay. So he feeds them. And then the very hungry wizard as well. So this opening of your home, because we associate home and our like food, right, and the good stuff in our home with like hard-earned money, like we spend stuff on this groceries. Practicing hospitality creates kind of like a back door in our heart to let us kind of loosen up the grip on the possessions that we have, on the money that we have. This is easy to say, hard to do, but we need to practice to actually seeing others as others and seeing a real need, and not when the temptation comes to kind of look away, close your eyes, rationalize the need that we encounter. We need to try to combat that and stay alert to that. And this is an important one, I think, as well. We need to think of ourselves as stewards, not as owners of things that we possess. It's a biblical principle, right? All we have is yours, O Lord, and of your own we give you. In my church tradition, we say this every time we give tithe, like we give offerings. It's true, everything that we have is given to us by God. We give him back what he gave us. We're stewards of our possessions. And when you think of yourself as a steward, you behave differently than when you think of yourself as a master. And again, when you think of Tolkien's characters that go wrong, a lot of them go wrong when they start thinking of themselves, when stewards start thinking of themselves as masters, right? So, yeah, I think, oops, let's go back to the pretty thing. So that's kind of the end of my lecture. And now, do you have any questions? Yeah, so that's a good question. We should probably take those characters one at a time. So, well, Ebenezer Scrooge and Zacchaeus might be closer together. So there you do have people who really, really are in the grips of avarice, right? Like they're all the way down. Fraud, treachery, like you name it. They have all the daughter vices and some. And the Lord kind of creates radical transformation in them. So that is actually their actions there in like getting rid of vast amounts of the hoard are consistent with an Aristotelian picture, because Aristotle says that, you know, if you know that you have a particular vice and you're aiming to, like, if you want to get the virtue, you ought to aim not at the mean, but you gotta aim like beyond the mean. You gotta aim like further, because you're not at the mean, right? You're here, so you gotta run kind of harder than you would have otherwise. Yeah. Francis of Assisi is an interesting case. That is actually the reason medievals thought about avarice. I think, well, part of the reason they thought about avarice a lot and wrote about avarice was because during the medieval, like high Middle Ages, that was a big controversy. Can Christians possess any belongings at all? That was a big question that was hashed back and forth, and there was actually the breakaway order from Francis of Assisi after his death. There was Fraticelli, little brothers. They called themselves. That was like radical vow of poverty. Ended up kind of going really extreme, saying like, no, if you're Christian, like it is absolutely wrong for you to have anything at all if you're Christian. Ended up being condemned by the church, hunted down, really kind of ugly medieval stuff. Sometimes, you know, people felt strongly about things. Yeah, so the Christendom kind of had to hash out this question: is it okay for us to have any possessions whatsoever? And the answer that they collectively came to was that no, like absolute refusal of possessions is not the right way to go. Now, Francis himself, Saint Francis, he's that is a topic of another lecture. It's like too big of a question, but basically there are like particular reasons why Francis could say no possessions whatsoever. He was a monastic. Any kind of monastic person takes the vow of poverty. It's like refuses, relinquishes their possessions. So layer upon layer upon layer of complexity. Yeah, but. Yeah, thanks. Yes, Colin. I don't know if you guys could hear. Basically, the question is, when Bilbo gives the ring to Frodo, is that an act of generosity or not? Or is it just an act of like freeing yourself of this thing that has hold of your heart? I don't see that as an act of generosity. Because at that point, Bilbo is, along with Gollum, not viewing the ring in like for its monetary value, right? And the ring is like has supernatural power of its own, right? It gets your will and doesn't let you go. So that there, and he's not really willing. Like there's a difference between giving somebody generously. There's this like goodwill that you you give freely, and there's very much like dragged along, kicking and screaming, kind of in letting this thing go. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And this is where it is helpful to distinguish like different kinds of possessiveness, because like if possessiveness is this general sin, inordinate desire for any good, that's like definition of a sin. Period, right? That's Augustine's inordinate loves, right? Like you turn to something lesser, you turn to a created thing as opposed to the creator. In Melkor, and particularly, I see, I mean, he's an equivalent of Satan, right? And Satan's sin is pride. And that is, so there is this ultimate desire for personal excellency, inordinate desire for personal excellency. That in Melkor's case manifests as desire to have this imperishable flame so that I can also create like Iluvatar creates, right? But it's different from greed, yeah. And Fëanor, I think, is kind of in the direction of Gollum in that sense that he does not value Silmarils for their monetary value. It is, in there, yeah, it's not Gollum. Sorry, I take it back. I think it's also in the direction of pride. Because like, I have this amazing thing that I have created. I will never again be able to do this. So if you take this away from me, I will be diminished, in a sense. Yeah. I don't think so. Because in prodigality, you also kind of have to, like, you have to attach some value to it. You have to attach the value of like, I can get all this stuff for my money, right? I spend it on foolish things. I'm spendthrift, but I'm like getting something for my money. Yeah, this is pleasure. And Tom Bombadil is just real, like, it's just nothing. It's sand for him, yeah. But he and the Treebeard and the Entwives, right, the Ents and the Entwives, they all, and Beorn, they're all really good examples of different models of stewardship. In Tolkien, you have, like, if you go in by this, like, last point, we ought to be thinking of ourselves as stewards. In Tolkien, we actually have, like, stewardship can look very differently, right? You can be an Entwife for, like, no, this is how you are. You grow in this particular way. You do these things, right? Or you can be the Ent for, like, oh, the wildness, go for it. The Beorn, very much like caring for the creatures that like live with him as his own children, and Tom Bombadil, who's also kind of, you have a sense that like he cares for the wood, but in a very different way from Beorn caring for the animals in his care. So yeah. Oh, that's an excellent question. I have like different things that I want to say. I'm going to start with this. I think in this, like in your guys' particular case, I would maybe advise starting with hospitality, because it is kind of in the same neighborhood. It's not exactly the same, but it opens you up to kind of similar, opens you up in a similar way that generosity does. And to have, and to practice hospitality, you don't have to have a lot of money, right? But it gets you in the practice of sharing freely of what you have. Another way is to kind of just start thinking, like, what am I spending the money that is not my own, what am I spending it on? Because that would combat the prodigality, which ends up motivating a lot of avarice. Yeah.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.